Since we've already covered the posterior pituitary, let's move on to the anterior pituitary. Now, the anterior pituitary, known as the adenohypophysis, has connections up to the hypothalamus as well, but they're not direct neural connections. Instead, we're going to utilize the blood system of transport this way. So while last time in the posterior pituitary, the hypothalamus produced the hormone and then just sent it down into the posterior pituitary, now with the anterior pituitary, the hypothalamus does not produce the hormones. The anterior pituitary produces its own hormones. Instead, the hypothalamus will produce inhibiting and stimulating hormones. So think of them as kind of precursors. They're going to say, hey, release this or don't release that. So what ends up happening is up here in the hypothalamus, those neurons will produce these releasing and inhibiting hormones. Then they'll put those releasing and inhibiting hormones into this blood here, into the capillaries. That's the hypophyseal portal. That system will take those releasing and inhibiting hormones and then allow them to go down into the anterior pituitary. Then the anterior pituitary will either produce or not produce, depending on the hormone. Then it produces, and then it stores, and then it releases these hormones from the anterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary produces, stores, and releases its own hormones. Now, of the anterior pituitary hormones, we'll focus on 6 primary hormones. We have growth hormone, GH. While you might think, hey, I know what that does, it grows. True, but there are other functions as well that growth hormone does. So we'll get into those. The second one is thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH. Now, thyroid-stimulating hormone, also known as thyrotropin, does like the name implies. It stimulates the thyroid gland. Third one here we have is adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. Now this adrenocorticotropic hormone, break the name down, adrenal gland, cortical, cortex. So that means it tells you this is the adrenal cortex is being stimulated, tropic. So this hormone tells you it's stimulating the adrenal cortex. Follicle stimulating hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone does just that. It stimulates the follicles. Think egg and sperm. Luteinizing hormone, LH, also deals with reproductive processes. And then we have prolactin, PRL, we'll get to last. Now, all 6 of these hormones, they're all categorized the same way though. All these are protein-based hormones. Now, if you remember back, we talked about the differences of amino acid hormones or steroid-based hormones. These are all the amino acid-based hormones here. So they all have that same basic idea of how they're being built and their structures. Now, all of them except growth hormone use the cyclic AMP pathway. That's the cAMP secondary messenger system. If you're not sure what that one is, go back a video or so. We talked about that previously. But the cyclic AMP pathway is a secondary messenger system because these hormones do not go into the cell. Their receptors, remember, are on the outside of the cell surface. Now, growth hormone also uses a secondary messenger system, just not the cAMP system. TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. All 4 of these hormones are known as tropic hormones. Tropic hormones because they will stimulate another gland to produce hormones. So they're creating this kind of cascade. They're from the anterior pituitary, which means the hypothalamus has releasing and inhibiting hormones for them. They then go to other glands to stimulate different hormones being released. Starting to get the idea here how it's one thing controls another thing, which controls another thing, which controls another thing. We have this whole series of different glands all helping to regulate each other in this process, in this chain. So these hormones will stimulate other hormone production. Let's start with growth hormone and work our way through that list of 6 hormones. Now, growth hormone, known as GH, is produced, stored, and secreted by the anterior pituitary. Specifically, the cells are the somatotrophs. So in the anterior pituitary, the somatotrophs are producing this growth hormone. Now, granted, that's going to be in response to stimulus from the hypothalamus. Now, sure, this is going to cause growth, but notice it's going to target bones, targeting skeletal muscle as well. So why would you target your bones and your muscles? Well, that's what's growing. That's a lot of your body. It's not it, there's more than that. But it is one of the main targeting systems. But also, it helps deal with protein synthesis and using fat as a fuel source instead of glucose. This way is trying to conserve your glucose and utilize fat reserves in your body. So we have other functions to growth hormone. And the one at the bottom here, probably the most effects you think of as far as growth hormone deals with, indirectly. It's these insulin-like growth factors. So these IGFs, insulin-like growth factors. Now the main one, IGF-1, is coming out of the liver. This is what will help to mediate the growth process, which means that growth hormone isn't directly causing the growth. It's working through this intermediary, these IGFs, insulin-like growth factor. But again, remember, growth hormone is regulated by the hypothalamus, which means you have growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH, and growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH. That one's also known as somatostatin, as another name. But we have both these GHRH and GHIH being produced by the hypothalamus and then secreted via those blood vessels down to the anterior pituitary, stimulating the anterior pituitary to either release growth hormone or inhibit the release of growth hormone. All right, this one has a lot of information on it, so I'm going to throw up big full screen here. As you start looking at the first thing up top, you're looking at the growth hormone releasing hormone. So the hypothalamus, right up here, is producing GHRH. That then is being sent down into the anterior pituitary. Once in the anterior pituitary, GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone, stimulates the production and release of growth hormone. Now, this growth hormone is released into the blood. That means it can go everywhere in your body, head to toe. The growth hormone has receptors on most cells in the body. But let's start over here on the one side. First off, we're going to have this glucose sparing effect. I already mentioned this. The idea is this hormone, growth hormone, will stimulate the utilization of fats as a fuel source. By utilizing fat as a fuel source, you're conserving the glucose levels in your body. All right, function number 2 is dealing with the growth effects. Now, sure, you're going down to your bones, down to your muscles, they're growing, but you also have to have the nervous system growing. Your immune cells are growing and functioning. So a lot of other parts and pieces that are also growing as the muscles and bones grow as well. Third function here is going to be your diabetogenic effect. The diabetogenic effect is dealing with the liver and IGFs. What's happening here in this diabetogenic effect is looking at the liver being stimulated by growth hormone to produce insulin-like growth factors. In this case, IGF-1 is being released. That then is going to head and further stimulate growth of all these other parts from the previous step we just talked about. So it's helping to mediate a further growth and helping the body grow. Now, you have to be able to regulate, to control the amount of growth hormone, because too much growth hormone and the body grows too quickly. Not enough growth hormone, the body doesn't grow enough. So what we have here is IGFs, in this case IGF-1, is a negative feedback cycle. So those levels of IGF-1 are being monitored up by this hypothalamus. As you're monitoring it in the hypothalamus, as the IGF levels rise, the hypothalamus is going to start to release growth hormone inhibiting hormone. That's going to be sent down via the blood into the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary says, hey, we just received growth hormone inhibiting hormone. It's going to reduce production of growth hormone and reduce the release of growth hormone. And that will stay in place until the IGF levels drop down. Then the body will say, hey, there's not enough IGF for a negative feedback. And we'll start going back to step one again, back to the growth hormone releasing hormone. And you won't be sending out any more growth hormone inhibiting hormone. It's a balancing act. But the negative feedback helps keep this in homeostatic levels. So really, growth hormone has a whole lot of important functions. And it's not just when you're a child, because yes, you're growing a child, but you still have these glucose sparing effects that can be throughout the rest of your life. So you have all this growth hormone in higher levels in childhood, but you still have it throughout the rest of your life. So really, growth hormone is controlled by these two things: growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So it's important to have both those in place. All right, thyroid-stimulating hormone. Now the thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH. Now the case of thyroid-stimulating hormone, what we're looking at here now is produced by the thyrotrophs. Those are the cells in the anterior pituitary that will produce this hormone and also are either stimulated or inhibited by the hormones coming out of the hypothalamus. Now, the thyroid-stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the thyroid glands. But what's interesting is it's dealing with normal development of the thyroid, as well as the secretion of the thyroid. Because as a child's growing, you have to develop all these glands. So the thyroid-stimulating hormone. So how do we regulate the thyroid-stimulating hormone? So thyroid-stimulating hormone, like growth hormone, has regulation occurring back in the hypothalamus. So first thing we have is TRH. Now, TRH is thyrotropin releasing hormone. Thyrotropin releasing hormone is produced by the hypothalamus, secreted into the blood again, going down to the anterior pituitary. Once thyrotropin releasing hormone is received by the anterior pituitary then can produce and release thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. So this TSH then is released by the anterior pituitary into your bloodstream. It goes from head to toe, but the receptors are found on the thyroid gland. So what happens with the thyroid gland is you've got plenty of production of thyroid hormone until enough is present. Once you have enough thyroid hormone, then you can then have inhibition occurring, a negative feedback. So enough thyroid hormone right here sends this negative feedback up here and here. So the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus, saying, hey, we've got enough, stop producing it. So a lot of times you can either have thyrotropin releasing hormone get pulled back, which then slows down and stops the thyroid stimulating hormone, or you're looking at the anterior pituitary slowing down thyroid stimulating hormone itself. So you have this negative feedback which occurs to higher levels of thyroid hormones in the blood. So that's TSH, again, being regulated by the hypothalamus. So looking at growth hormone, looking at thyroid stimulating hormone so far. Both have controlling aspects back from the hypothalamus. Both are then sending out their hormones into the blood from the anterior pituitary. A few more hormones to go through though, so we'll get to that in a minute.